I'm delighted to be joined by Kevin Simpson, a hugely experienced educator and founder of AIELOC, which is the Association of International Educators and Leaders of Color. Welcome, Kevin. It's great to have you on this call today.
Definitely. Thanks, Max. Looking forward to today.
Wicked. And today we'll be talking all about how schools can build and retain diverse and inclusive teams. I think we'll just go straight into it, Kevin, with the first question. It'd be great to get a bit of background and a bit about your journey through education to date.
Definitely. All right. So I always like to start by saying I'm a kid from Flint, Michigan in the U.S. Grew up born and raised in the Midwest part of the States with some Southern roots. So my mom and dad hail from South Carolina. So, there's always those trips back down South as we grew up. So that's sort of like I'm a sort of mix of, Midwest and South in terms of like the upbringing and things of that nature. Education, I think for me, the discovery was in 1994, so some time ago. I was an undergrad back at Michigan State University and a part of what was called the Young Spartan program. And the whole focus of that program was to connect the university that I was going to with the local schools. And so bringing resources, whether it was like individuals, organizations in and exposing kids. And so I worked closely to a principal, Dr. Liz, and she was amazing. And just all those different experiences with teachers and with students really just sort of gave me an eye opener into the possibilities of being an educator. And so I was sort of pre-law and added education as an additional major and went through a traditional program. And then started teaching full-time in a few years later after I graduated. And then overseas, I would discover during grad school. So around 2000, I met someone who looked like me and said that they were going to go back to London when they finished their program in the summer. And I was like, oh, interesting. And so that was the spark that sort of started between him. And then I had a mentee who said, I'm going to Sudan to start teaching there. And so 17 years ago, I took the leap and started to apply and look into international schools. And shout out to John Ritter. I always have to give him a shout out at VNC International School. He's my first head of school. And it was just an amazing journey in terms of, an eye-opener in terms of living and learning abroad. So that was my entryway into international schools. And then I would go on to work in Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, and then a whole bunch of other places with a company that I set up some years ago, actually 15 this year, celebrate 15 years, called KDSL Global.
Congratulations. Fantastic, Kevin. So broadly experienced in such a sort of diverse geographic background as well with the way you've been teaching. So great. And so moving on to the next question. So, what are the benefits of having a diverse team in your school? And how might a school attract diverse candidates?
Great question. And I think that, it's been interesting listening and hearing, throughout the international school ecosystem. And I definitely want to start by saying this, I've been hearing folks say, oh, such and such, that's a diversity hire, that's a diversity hire. And I'm like, even the jargon and the language we're using, when we say that, is that like inclusive language? Because to me, we're already starting, we're starting something that we should start, and for me, in that response, I would say what I've seen, I believe it's a guy out of Toronto. I want to say his name is Braveen. He calls people we're in situations where everyone looks the same, homogeneity hires. And so it's like, we don't want that to be our culture. We don't want that to be us, and I think that's a lot of when I look at things around like diversity and the benefits, there's so many benefits. I think around just my experience working with folks who speak different languages, who are from different countries, who are from different cultures and customs, and knowing that everyone had different ideas. Everyone brought different perspectives. There were a variety of talents. If I didn't have something that, hey, I can go see Jody because she's well-versed in early years and in elementary. And so I think a lot of it is taking stock and saying, as an organization, as a school, do we value diversity? Is it something that is written, in our vision, in our mission, in our goals? And then not only is it written, how are we living it? So we to look back at it. How does that come into play? And how do we define diversity? How do we not define it? How do we want to define it? And again, having it as a constant part of the conversation. And for me, I think a lot of it is about knowing people. It's about building relationships. And it's about, I had one of my, I always say I had these stellar leaders who were administrators. And one of them said, he asked me, he's like, how can we feed your soul? You know, and I think that's the thing that, you know, when I think about leaders and hiring and bringing folks on, is making sure that we see people taking an asset-based approach. You know, a lot of times we hear fit, but it's like, how is this person going to contribute to the culture of, you know, our environment, and making sure that that is kept in the forefront. And so I think there's numerous benefits we know when we look across research to diverse hires and just like diverse teams. The attraction, I think, and I'll talk about some of the examples too, in terms of attracting folks. I think a lot of it deals with looking and assessing where we're at, having that open dialogue. I think it's looking and seeing who's on staff, who are people who we want to share their story and their journeys about working in specific schools, and making sure that we're putting that at the forefront, and it being a constant. You know, I see schools that highlight teachers, teachers of the month, teachers throughout, various teachers, and so making sure that along the lines that, you know, folks see themselves, because I hear so often people saying, I'm not going to apply for that school because I don't see anyone who looks like me, you know, based on their identity. And so I think when it comes to that attraction, it's looking and seeing practices that are in place. It's looking to see, have there been any barriers put up? You know, we talked the other day about, you know, this non-native English speaker piece. Sometimes it's like you must have, you know, training in certain things, when we know that folks can learn. You know, when I applied for IB schools, I was not IB certified and IB trained. Let me be honest. You know, my approach was learning as much as possible about inquiry, visiting schools, talking with leaders, taking courses, and becoming well-versed, and then using that in my class back then. Then I applied for IB schools, you know? And so I think a lot of times it's looking and seeing what's in place, and are there things that we can pull back and pull away that will still attract great candidates, you know, across the board. And we have some examples. I think about one of our aspiring leaders of color, Tanae, him and his colleague, Megan, in Southeast Asia. They did an article on dismantling and rebuilding recruitment practices through an equity lens, and they're out of Southeast Asia. And for them, you know, sort of like 5 things stood out when I looked at their story. It was being intentional. So being intentional in terms of saying, again, for us as an organization, we value diversity. It's looking at values, you know, again, so if we say we are a diverse environment, we value diversity, again, making sure that it matches. Looking at data, I mean, that's a given right there. We can just look at data and look and see, from leadership to teachers, to all staff, like who is here, and then asking who is not here, you know, and then again, going another step, why are they not here? You know, constantly being engaging and learning, obviously. So there'll be that state of learning. What do we know? What don't we know? What do we need to unlearn? And then being active, you know, seeking out organizations that focus on diversity, and becoming a part of them in some way, shape, or form.
And you're so right, Neil, that it has to be something intentional, right? That you have to live it on a daily basis, and you know, it shouldn't just be something that you think of once in a while and then sort of tick a box or something. You know, it's something, like you said, that you have to live and breathe. And I suppose it is part of the culture, right, of the school, and that's a very intentional thing. So, what are some of the ways that a school could, you know, look at their own culture and say, okay, you know, we've got some issues here maybe, or we want to sort of be more inclusive as a sort of a whole school. What kind of things could a school do to build that more inclusive culture?
Yeah, great question. And I definitely want to give a shout out to Katrina Daniels Samasa. She is out of South Korea, and this is one thing that she hones in on. She says, before schools dive into, you know, DEIJ work, you know, looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, it's important to take stock and know your school culture. And what is the culture? What's the sort of the makeup? What's behind the scenes? What's the day-to-day? And how aware are we of that? And I think that's always a place, you know, to start, especially when we think about inclusion. So example, it's June, it's Pride Month around the world. You know, this is a prime example. If your school is quiet, not saying anything, not honor, you know, that's a prime example right there. That's just a quick snippet. And so it's like, how is your school celebrating families, staff, you know, scholars who identify as LGBTQ+. You know, does the school have a designated DEIJ leader? So is there an investment in having someone who's going to focus on inclusion in our institution? Obviously, coming back to learning, and I always say schools are they're ecosystems, but they're learning organizations. So how are we constantly being in a state of learning about inclusion, what that means? So if you look back over, staff meetings, you look back over your department, meetings, any meetings with parents throughout the year, count the number of times you all have had conversations related to inclusion, and things of that nature. And that, again, data. So that's always a big one. And then I think there's always those simple things, listening to staff, having those forums, those opportunities where staff can give feedback, whether staff are going off and learning from other places, bringing that back, and what impact that could have on the school and on teams and things of that nature. And then obviously is making that time to discuss, assess, monitor inclusion, making goals. And again, I think if you have someone designated, and that's part of their role, that'll make it even more better. So versus like here, you have this for a certain percent of time, but having someone who's designated in the building, that their sole purpose is to ensure that when we look at our environment, our school, that is welcoming, it's affirming to all identities who are here.
And with some of the schools you're working at, Kevin, are you seeing that more and more that schools are having a dedicated lead for DEIJ and really focusing on that? Is that something you're seeing?
Yeah, definitely starting to see. We did at AIELOC, we held space every other month for folks who identify as DEIJ leaders. And that was a place for them to come together, share practices, learn together. We had guest speakers and things. And so that, I think definitely this past year, we saw an increase, in leaders. And all models differ. Some schools, it was like part-time, sometimes. And I think for us, if they're going to have that leadership position, number one, it needs to be full-time, because that you can't, couch and put that with a teaching position, for example. And then obviously making sure they're part of the senior leadership team, and that their resources, there's an investment in terms of like their own learning and learning for the entire staff. Because like I was talking to, I think, a school last week, we talked about the life of the school, and that DEIJ leader is a part of the life of the school. So that is from buses to the canteen, they are around. So there's not just couched in a certain office in a corner. They're constantly a part of the entire culture and ecosystem of an organization of a school. And say for example, a school is really making strides with diversity now, and how would they look to so integrating diversity is one thing, and sort of retaining that is another. So how might schools go about retaining that over the medium to long term? Obviously, this is something that they want to sort of integrate for the foreseeable, going forwards. So how might a school do that in the long term? Yeah, that retention's so big. I'm glad you asked that, Mask. And so that's one thing I think when schools are talking about, oh, we want to recruit, or we're looking at recruitment, and I'm always like, are you looking at retention? So it's just like, it's not just like, let's look at recruitment. It's like, those should be married together. So I should be looking at, where are we recruiting from? But not only in that, like, again, going back to, like I said before, feeding souls. So how are we going to, have those conversations around retention, and also around like developing? So how are we thinking long-term around a candidate who's coming into our specific institution? And so I think one thing we recently asked that, so I can give some quotes. So one of our questions we asked some AIELOC folks in our Affinity space on Facebook was around retention. And what sort of schools are offering, what they did, what they may have not did. Again, you want to ask those questions. And here's a couple of things I'm going to read. So we had a member say, hey, just being honest, I left the school I was at. They sort of tried to guilt people, but staff suggested better housing options, incentives for responsible utility use, and actual DEIJ initiatives. But then it also was a piece that said that they got renewal bonus yearly after 2 years. So there was like a financial piece. Another AIELOC members say that their school offers a nice chunk of money yearly after you renew, after staying for 2 years. You have more allowance. So a lot of these are financial, so a lot of these that they were getting more financial, and some were housing related in some way, shape, or form. And then another one said it was an increase in their end of service gratuity. So that was sort of the trend that we were seeing. Now, a lot of the incentives and getting folks to say were financial. So it was connected to money. And so obviously some of the things that I did not hear, because again, I'm looking, this is what we heard, but I did not hear things around like professional learning, opportunities to enter a pathway, on leadership. Some of them did cite enrollment or able to participate in graduate coursework, if they needed to do that. But again, it's just looking and seeing, taking stock of what do we have, and also again listening to and asking those questions of teachers, and taking action, and not, again, like I said, making sure that with the recruitment we're thinking simultaneously with retention. So how are we going to say? But then a lot of times, like I said, you can find that out in an interview. You can ask those types of questions, as well as like just getting started. And for me, I think one of the things that they, John Ritter, they did an excellent job of us. Once I said, yes, I accept the offer, I had a mentor within 24 hours. So Bruce and I were like right on email, what I mean? So, and to me, that said a lot. Like, it's like, wow, I have somebody who I can talk to like right now, ask my questions. I've never been to Southeast Asia, to be in Chin Lao. And so I think that was, I'm gonna be honest with you, that was like just a weight lifted off, to know that I'm like, I have somebody, and then to meet them, when I got there. And so I think, again, those mentoring programs and things of that nature that, can be built in.
Very interesting. And there's a really interesting question that's just sort of popped into my head. And what is it, what is it? So you're a new teacher going to a school and you're interviewing, and you really want to know that it is a diverse environment, or that is a massive part of the value system of the school. What kind of questions could you ask? If you, all you say is the websites and the SLTs that you're sort of interviewing with, what kind of questions could you ask to sort of unearth this a little bit and understand or learn more about whether it is truly a diverse environment that you're entering?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because like you said, obviously you can look and see, you can, I would ask things around, like if I feel like if there's not a staff member that is appointed in that way, shape, or form, like meaning that they're like, oh, we're going to connect you with someone. Then I know people who said, could you connect me with someone at the school? Again, and so I think if the leadership or someone's not able to answer or not willing to answer, just like connecting with someone at that site, so that they can address any of those specific questions around. But even just asking in terms of saying, I've noticed that in the international school ecosystem, there's been a shift in work around DEIJ. Can you share with me where your school stands and some of the work that you all have did? I think that's a fair question, to ask. And to learn in terms of more about, and obviously my big thing is always going through these websites, like I said, going back to the mission, vision, and values. And if it's there, asking, a question around like, I've noticed in the values, one of the things you said is diversity. Because one of the powerful questions that I was actually asked in my interview, I so appreciate this for being Chin International School. They took each of the values and they asked, what did it mean to me? And give an example of, as an educator, like something I did that connected with that. And again, I think that's a fair, I know me, I would walk around there like, here are your values, can y'all tell me, what does this look like in action at the school? Fair question, So, because I always say, as much as I'm being interviewed, I'm also interviewing.
Absolutely. And that's such an interesting point that a lot of people tend to forget, right? Even in any environment that you're interviewing at, it's almost like you feel like you're on show, but actually, it is a two-way piece, right? It's and even the notice period, for example. Not notice period. The first sort of 3 months while you're working, and so it's both for the employer to see whether the employee is right, but also the employee to see whether the employer is right as well. So yeah, that's such an interesting and important point. Yeah, for sure. Great. And Kevin, what would you say the potential impacts of maybe not getting this right, or having a diverse and inclusive workforce in your school? What could be some of the potential impacts there?
Yeah, I think, when I think of these scholars who've asked, when we have an international school leader who looks like us. So I think going back to that, what Raveen Kumar talks about, homogeneity hires, that everyone looks the same, is the same, thinks the same. So it's that, lost out on perspective and ideas and innovation. And then obviously it's getting into that whole notion of what does it mean to be international? You know what I mean? So if we all come from or look the same, it's like, how international are we when it comes to, leadership and teaching staff and things of that nature? And obviously it's a miss for the kids and for the families, and like I said, I've heard a bunch of kids that said, I've reflected on my experience and my teachers throughout only came from here, only spoke this, only, believe this, only were this, and so, they've heard that. And then, to me, it's like, turnover, it's like the environment, how welcoming. If folks walk into a place where everybody's looking the same, it's like, do I belong here? Then it becomes a whole questioning um, of presence and role and things of that nature. So I think it's one of those things that is constantly, it's a constant, within the recruitment and the hiring is obviously just constantly looking at who's here, and like I said, asking who's here, but who's not here. Because we know that representation matters, and that when scholars see themselves and see, someone, I've had folks that are in parts of Africa who are from Africa that teach at a school in Africa, and just listen to their experience with, the scholars, and like, I speak the same language as the kids here, and they're just like, wow, like, miss or sir, like you speak the same language as us, so it's just so different. I mean, I just, reflect on those experiences just overseas and obviously in the States, of being a Black man. And like, I remember having a class full of boys that looked like me. And it was like, it was a different, feel, different feel. Like, it's like them being open and them being just clinging, like, all around. I mean, so it's this piece that just to try to explain it, you see, I'm like, oh, but it's that piece on just representation. And for me, I'm like, kids need to see everybody, especially when we talk about international, talking about global, kids need to hear all kinds of language. They need to experience folks that love different ways, and experience folks that worship different ways, that look different ways. And so I think that's our big thing, is that, we all have different identities, some of them intersect. And it's like, how do we capture that and know that that is a strength, and a constant. So again, taking an asset-based approach in the work.
Mm-hmm. And you came to found AIELOC over the last few years, and it'd be great to dive into a bit about the fantastic work you guys are doing, all around the world with schools and educators. So yeah, if you would sort of want to go into a bit about that, the organization that you founded, and a bit about the mission as to why you started in the first place.
Definitely, thank you. So it was around 2017, and we had a colleague who I was serving as a reference. And she was told, don't apply for that job. They want a white British man. And when she told me that, when I checked in with her, I was just, it just didn't sit well with me, and it's one of those things where it's like, you either listen to it and it's like, whatever, or it's like, for me, it was a call to action. And I set up then a Facebook group. It became an affinity space for folks who identify as Black, Indigenous, Asian, Latinx, as a person of color. Just a space where people can just connect. Because for me, I was like, is this who we are? Like, is this going on? Like, and, out of that sort of formed a couple of years later, we turned to association. So it's where we hone in and devote our time to amplifying the work of international educators and leaders of color. And our sort of three pieces that we delve in is advocacy, learning, and research. Now, it's because those are things that we really didn't really see. So people having someone who can work side by side with them solo or as a part of a group or with a partner to advocate when different issues arise in any way, shape, or form at their school and their site, especially if they're the only one. Learning, a lot of the learning, who gets to lead learning, who don't get to lead learning. There was a definite pattern across that. And so it's like, it shouldn't all be the same. We're talking international and global. So making sure that there's representation accordingly. And then research, like the topics that are researched, it's like, who is researching folks of global majority? Where are the folks that have these various identities? Where are their stories? And so that's what we focus on. And some of the things we do, we do an annual conference every November. It's been virtual and open to everyone. Anyone can attend that. We do ongoing learning webinars, same thing, anyone can attend those. And then we have different groups based on sort of identities. So we've had Black women in international schools, Asian Pacific Islanders, we'll start Latinx. We've had African Ally affinity group. So we have various groups that will meet, and those are member driven. So the members initiate those groups. So members just approach AIELOC and say, hey, we're interested in this. And we have SWANA for folks that are from the MENA region. And we just provide space and say, how can we support? And then we do, some of the things we do is we have our Spinal Leaders of Color program. And again, this came about because we were in so many sessions where the conversation was, where's the pipeline? We're not seeing, folks of the global majority or BIPOC folks apply for these leadership positions. And so once we sort of heard that a few times, Nadine Richards and I worked together to craft and create this program. So we just had our first cohort of 7 folks graduate, 7 stellar alumni. And so we'll start our next program up in the US fall, so September. And we collaborating this year with ECIS, ISS, and CIS. They're our partners with it. And so we'll have a cohort of 8 to 10. We've had a lot of people apply, so it was definitely busy. So we're looking at those coming up soon. So yeah, that's just a little, just again, about what we do. And everything else, we always say, we have an international educator equity statement, because we feel like that grounds us, that tells the work that we're devoted to doing, to ensuring that when we think about international schools, that diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and anti-racism are not just words, they're not just terms, they're not just statements, but they're actions that we are all devoted to, that we know that this work, whether, the kids that we're working with, we don't know where they're going to end up in the world, from university to business to wherever their trajectory is, they're going to interact with all kinds of people. And so the question becomes, like, how are we engaging in those conversations, those questions, and making sure that we're teaching effectively, to meet, to make sure when they meet the world, when they encounter different situations, that they have the language and the know-how, but also to say that they'll be able to look back on their own experience and say, I'm aware of this. I've been globally prepared in any situation. And so I think that's our big thing. So we have 2 youth partners, which I can brag on all day, Reset Revolution and Otis, the organization of Decolonize International Schools, and they are young and passionate. And I think that's our big thing, is making sure that in all this work, we center students, we center their voice, we center alumni. So that's AIELOC in a nutshell.
That's amazing, and it is so incredible to see someone that's it's turned an experience into action, and sort of built this amazing community, resources, research around the topic and around such an important cause. So yeah, incredible work, and just picking up on something you mentioned there, the Inspiring Leaders of Color, the program. It'd be great to just dive into that a little bit. And is that a year-long program, or is it a 6-month program? And how can you mentioned there 8 or 9 people on the cohort at the moment? You said how many people can join that? And yeah, that'd be great.
Definitely. So we launched it in March of 2021, and so it runs roughly around a year, so 9 months, almost a year. And so it's a combination of coaching. So each mentee is assigned a mentor. We try to match them geographically. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but they are in ongoing conversation with them. We have a platform through SchoolSpot where any sessions that we hold, so we hold these ongoing monthly community learning sessions, who feature different international school leaders, folks in the recruitment space. It might be consultants on different topics. So we've had like Emily Meadows, we've worked with ISS Search. We've had different leaders like Ryan Prasad of Brazil that will share on different topics. And so that's sort of the collaborative piece, but also the sort of like, after I've heard this, sort of what's my next step? What's my new learning? What's my next step? And then the conversation between the coach and or the mentor and the mentee will occur. And then just like networking amongst each other. And so this first cohort that just graduated, we had 7 all over the world, mostly Asia, mostly based in Asia. And then this next cohort that we start, we're looking at probably 8 to 10. We try to keep it small. And then throughout they have various sort of courses on different sort of topics that they're engaging in. So we talk about culturally responsive leadership, what it means to lead an effective team, challenging situations that occur at international schools, and everything else is around like inclusion, diversity, strategic thinking, marketing, and the board, working with the board.
Wonderful. Fantastic, Kevin. Thank you so much for your time. It's been such an enlightening conversation. It's such a big topic that I'm sure we could spend many more hours discussing. But yeah, thank you for this part 1 discussion. Maybe we can do a part 2 soon and sort of dive into a few of the areas that we've touched on in more depth. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, Kevin, and great to
anytime. And congratulations on the launch of the ISN network. We're super excited to share it with AIELOC, and anytime, invite us back anytime.
Amazing. Thanks so much. And for everyone listening, you'll be able to find all the links in the article below. So yeah, do go ahead and check out the great work that Kevin and his team are doing. Awesome. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Max.
Cheers.
Ciao.